So today's topic of authority was actually planned months ago, but it feels especially timely to me this week, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But as we engage with this topic, I think an important way for me to start out is to get to say something I don't often get to say from this stage, which is this, that I am so grateful to be a citizen of the United States. Especially as a son of two Air Force officers who served to protect our country, I have grown up revering America's role to be a protector of democracy and freedom around the globe. In fact, you want to know how patriotic I am? I'll tell you. I shared last week how much I love musicals personally. So here's how patriotic I am. Hamilton is only the second best musical made about the founding of our country. Anyone know the best one? 1776. Who has seen that one? A couple of you. All right, if you have not seen it, you must watch that musical. It's been made into a movie as well. And I loved watching the characters in this scene. This is John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. I love getting to see their personalities, not just know what they did for our country. I loved watching them debate and form together the founding principles of a nation rooted in freedom and justice. I'll tell you, my personal favorite has always been John Adams. I admire his intellect, his tenacity, his zeal so much. But nobody doubts that Ben Franklin was the most quotable founding father. He said so many witty things, wise things, profound things. In fact, there's a quote that he said that gets a lot of play these days especially. Ben Franklin wrote in a letter to the Pennsylvania Assembly, he said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Now, as a history buff, I will tell you this quote is basically completely taken out of context, and it's often used today with almost the exact opposite intent of what Ben Franklin meant by it. But regardless of Benjamin Franklin's original intentions for this quote, this is a healthy and an important thing for us to wrestle with, this balance between freedom and protection. We've got to figure this out because ultimately the healthy tension of these two things is the principle of organized society. It's what we all have to figure out. If you have too much protection, then you end up with a nanny state, right? Or if you have too much freedom, you end up with anarchy. And so we have to find where in between these two tensions we choose to live. And there's some easy and obvious ones. I willingly give up my freedom to drive on the left side of the road because it's safer for everybody if we all agree to drive on the right. We're all gonna drive on the right together. That protects everyone, that we sacrifice that freedom for the sake of that protection. Or I willingly give up my First Amendment freedom of speech and I don't yell fire in a crowded theater because I know that would cause harm because by falsely creating a panic and a stampede, I would hurt people. Finding the healthy balance between freedom and protection is the thing that we're all called to do as being part of a society. And what I'll say is I suspect that most Americans, myself included, that if you ask us, we would say that we want to maximize our personal liberties and minimize the rules and laws necessary for protection. Right? I think that's what most Americans would naturally say. As much freedom as possible, as little protection as absolutely necessary. This is what Americans would say. Until we feel threatened. See, once we feel threatened, once there's a crisis, human nature is that we swing hard the other way. And we are very quick to sacrifice freedoms for the sake of protection. And by we, of course, I mean our founding fathers. I mean John Adams. See, here was what was such a bummer for me personally as someone who grew up idolizing John Adams. And then I got to high school US history class, and I found out that my personal hero, John Adams, once he was elected president, he passed a bunch of laws called the Alien and Sedition Acts. And what those acts meant was that you were no longer allowed to criticize John Adams or his political party. And anyone who did could be convicted and arrested, thrown in prison. John Adams, who supposedly loved free speech, passed one of the first laws in our country that limited free speech. And he did it for his own protection. Ironically, one of the people that was arrested and convicted under that law was Benjamin Franklin's own grandson. That tells you how quick we are to swing hard the other way. When John Adams is willing to arrest one of his own friends, offspring, for the sake of it. But if we're being really honest, though, about that moment, I don't even know that it was this. I think it was this. I think that what we see in that moment in history, what I see in myself, is that if we're being really honest about our human, sinful condition, what's actually going on is that I value my freedom more than I value your protection. And I value my protection more than I value your freedoms. We see it in John Adams, that the moment he was president, the moment people started to criticize him and the country started to go in a different way, John Adams was real quick to clamp down on other people's freedoms. I see it in myself. This isn't just a John Adams thing. This is a me thing, and I suspect it's a you thing, because I know that when I'm in crisis, when I'm in pain, I am extremely quick to clamp down on the people around me for the sake of my own protection. It's what I do. And I'm willing to limit their freedoms, to constrain their behaviors, to do whatever I need to do, even if it hurts them, for the sake of carving out some protection for myself. And I'll tell you, when I learned this about myself, I learned this because I got married. And suddenly this idealistic, picture-perfect version of Doug that I thought I was, it got exposed real quick. When suddenly I'm trying to carve out a life in the midst of uncertainty and stress with a partner. It got even harder when we suddenly invited a baby into the mix, and now suddenly we're exhausted and we're sleepless and we're grouchy and we don't know how to be parents, and everything is so uncertain, everything is so scary, and we're just lashing out and rigidly trying to clamp down on each other. And I'll tell you this, 15 years in, my marriage is unquestionably the single biggest blessing of my life. But I'll tell you this, we did not get here accidentally. It was 15 years of hard work. It's spending about half of our years in marriage counseling. And I am so grateful for our very first marriage counselor. She was actually a woman at our church. And she shared with us, shared with my wife specifically, who passed it on to me, she shared this truth that I resisted initially, but I want to share it with you now. She said, much of our suffering is caused by our inability to tolerate uncertainty. That's what she said. She said, so much of our suffering is caused by our human inability to tolerate uncertainty. And again, early on, I resisted it because I was pretty sure that most of my suffering was caused by my wife, and I told her that. But as I've wrestled with this truth for the years since, it's been over a decade, I've seen how exactly right that counselor was. That we hate uncertainty so much as human beings that we will rush to resolve it in the quickest way possible, even if it's unhealthy for us and for others, even if it harms other people. Because the quickest, surest antidote to uncertainty is control. See, if I can be in control, if I can control myself, control others, I don't have to live in that tension, in that scary space of uncertainty. And I have seen over and over again that she is so right, that in all the crises and the hard points of my life, as painful as they've been, my response, the way I clamp down in control, has always caused me greater suffering than the initial problem itself. I mean it. I've seen it in every facet of life. At work, when there's a crisis, and I'm afraid that I might personally fail or that the organization is not going to be able to navigate this uncertain moment, I clamp down on my coworkers and the people around me. And as a result, I make them feel suspicion, resentment, and distrust towards me because in this moment of crisis, they don't feel safe with me. They just feel like I'm just going to be rigid and controlling. And it's actually made the crisis worse. I've seen it in my marriage for years, that as we navigate just the regular messiness of life, you're gonna have moments of disagreement and stress and uncertainty with each other. And in so many moments of stress over the years, I found myself, not just in my marriage, with my friendships, with people that matter to me, my parents, I found myself in those moments saying the hurtful thing, the thing that I knew would make it worse, because then at least I was certain that it was awful. Like, rather than live in the tension, the uncertainty of how are we gonna get through this, how can we resolve this together, how can we find unity in the midst of this, it was simpler and it was more emotionally satisfying to just say the mean thing, and then at least I knew where we stood. It was certain that she didn't like me very much right now. I've seen it in my kids. I think if you've been a parent, you know that raising children is the most uncertain thing we can do, because there's only so much I contribute to who they are. At best, maybe 50% is what I pour into my kids. And the rest of their life is gonna be marked by their external circumstances, by the friendships they make, the networks they find, their personality, all of these things that are outside of my control. And it is so uncertain trying to raise up children to be responsible, holy people, that I find myself clamping down on them, that I so often in those moments where I think it's about, oh, they disrespected me, oh, they hit their sister, it's that the uncertainty of who they're growing up to be causes me to clamp down on them. See, as I've wrestled with this truth, I've noticed that I have these natural coping mechanisms in moments of crisis, and all of them are rooted in my need to have some sort of illusion of certainty. That in these moments of crisis, that I will blame others, because that lets me control the narrative. That lets me feel like I'm in charge of the story that we're telling, if I can blame them or be defensive about myself. Or I resort to sanctimony, which is that I can control my image. And maybe everything is crumbling inside behind the scenes, but if I can put up the picture-perfect facade, then that's a way for me to get some illusion of certainty in my life. Or, of course, as we always have, if I can punish the other person, if I can control their behavior, then it makes me feel like I've handled it. I've done the thing, there's been a consequence, and so now I'm in a good spot. I mean, I'll just show you how this plays out. This plays out in my marriage all the time. I resort to these three things over and over again. We have a moment of tension right now, I'll share with you, that my wife, she can never find any of her chargers. She moves them all around the house and then doesn't remember the last place she used them. But I always know where my charger is. It is always on my nightstand. So at the end of the day, when I'm tired and worn out, I can just peacefully reach over, plug in my phone, and then rest in the peace of knowing that my phone will be at 100% charge waiting for me in the morning. Except on those days where my wife has stolen my charger. Right, and in those moments, I go through this, in that stress and uncertainty of where I thought I knew how my night was gonna end. I immediately go, this is your fault. Look, you lost my charger again. Where is it? I don't know. I put it somewhere. It's somewhere in the house. And so I blame her and I get mad at her, and I say, I would never do this to you. I would never take your things. I would respect your stuff because I'm the sanctimonious one. I have the image. And then, of course, I want to lash out. I want to punish her. I want to say, all right, you know what? You steal my charger again, I'm going to steal your phone. And we're going to see how you like that. When suddenly the thing you need, you can't find, right? And then there's also maybe this hope that if she can't find her phone, she won't need to steal my charger. And it'll just stay on my nightstand peacefully. Over and over again, in moments of conflict, stress, uncertainty, I resort to these controlling behaviors to create some illusion of certainty in my life, to take away the pain of that stress. It's not just something we do individually, it's something that we've seen play out all throughout history. Every strongman and dictator in all of human history, these are the three buttons they push to clamp down on control and maintain their power. Every dictator says, hey, there's a group of people, and they're the reason why things are so wrong in our country right now. We know who to blame. It's them. It's not you. You and me, we're the righteous ones. We're the respectable folks. We know what we should be doing. We know the right direction for our country. And if you just let me stay in power, I will promise, I will make sure that I punish those who are hurting our society, our nation. Every strongman and dictator, this is their playbook. They so knowingly push all of our buttons and poke our deepest wounds, because so much of our suffering comes from our inability to deal with uncertainty. This is why crises so often bring out the worst in us. Because when someone else gets hurt, when they get mugged or harassed or abused, we need these tools to make ourselves feel better. It's to my shame that in most crises, I don't care as much about helping the other person. I care about giving myself the illusion of control in the face of their crisis. And I'll say things like, well, they shouldn't have been walking in that neighborhood so late at night. Well, they shouldn't have stayed in that relationship. They shouldn't have worn that outfit. I would never have done those things. And that's why I'm safe. And in fact, they only got what they deserved. And this is why it's so painful when a godly man dies for no earthly reason, because it strips away all of my illusions. There's no way to pretend that I am safe. He was a better man than I. There's nobody to punish. Who am I gonna punish? Because he's dead. There's nobody to blame. He did everything right. And yet, for the sake of control, for the sake of certainty, we always need to blame somebody. And God, in his mercy, has chosen to accommodate our desperate, fallen human need for blame. God, in fact, has given his people a ritual way for us to regain control in the midst of chaos and crisis. It happens in a bizarre and rarely preached about part of the Old Testament. But if you go to Leviticus, this is one of the first books of the law that God gave us in the Bible. Leviticus describes this moment where they were in the wilderness, where they were dealing with all the uncertainty and the crisis. And God gave them these instructions. He said, here's what you're gonna do. Aaron, who is the chief priest at the time, Aaron is going to cast lots for 2 goats. One lot's gonna be for the Lord, and the other is gonna be for the scapegoat. And Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord, and he will sacrifice it for a sin offering. That was normal. That's how they always did it. You took pigeons and cows and calves and goats, and you sacrificed them on the altar to the Lord for a sin offering. That was the normal part. But God says that the other goat, the goat chosen by Lot as the scapegoat, that shall be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it into the wilderness as a scapegoat. And so here's how it play out. So when Aaron has finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting and the altar, he shall bring forward the live goat. And he is to lay both of his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all of the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins, and put them on the goat's head. And then he shall send that goat away into the wilderness in the care of someone appointed for the task. And the goat will carry on itself all their sins to a remote place, and the man shall release it in the wilderness. This is such a fascinating and weird and beautiful way for God to give us, his people, a way to find certainty in the midst of struggle. That he gave them an animal that they could blame, that they could use to make themselves right, and that they could then punish it for their own behaviors. It was this powerful thing that in a crisis, God's people could always bring on the goats and ritualistically find a way to get back in control during moments of crisis. And this practice lasted for thousands of years, but the problem came when God's people stopped scapegoating the goats and they started scapegoating other people instead. In fact, we get this story a few thousand years later when Jesus was walking the earth. It's told in the Gospel of John. This is what happens. So Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and at dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. And the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group, and they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" And they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. And when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and he asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." This is a very upsetting and disturbing story. It's upsetting and disturbing for a lot of reasons, and I want to talk through a few of those. And I want to say it's important. We're intended to be upset by this story, but I suspect that we're often upset for the wrong reasons. See, first of all, I think in our modern morality that this story lands so badly because the punishment really doesn't seem to fit the crime. I mean, sure, you shouldn't commit adultery, but stoning, I mean, just make her wear a scarlet letter A on her clothes and move on, right? Or I think why this has been a hard story for me to grapple with is because I think many of us have tended to read this story through our own modern day lens of freedom versus protection. See, we look at the freedom side and we say, hang on, like that woman, she wasn't really hurting anybody. She should be free to sleep with whomever she wants. Or on the flip side, we say, well, no, if there are laws, if there's a functioning society, then it's important that there is a consistent application of consequences for breaking those laws. And if people just break whatever laws they want and there's no consequence, then we're gonna have anarchy. And because we see this story through an authority lens, it looks for all the world like Jesus is saying that laws don't matter. That everyone should just be forgiven all the time, no earthly consequences. And that's a beautiful story, Jesus, but it's no basis for society. How do we understand this? What I believe is that we understand this story when we look at it and have a different filter, the filter that says, this is a story about our need for scapegoating. This is a story of uncertainty versus our attempts to control. You see, the Pharisees and the religious leaders at that time, they were in the middle of countless crises. They were ruled by an incredibly oppressive government. The empire of Rome was harsh, constantly putting people to death. They were dealing with religious schisms. Even people of the faith were arguing and fighting with each other. They could not get along. They had poverty problems. People were struggling to afford things, let alone gas. They had an immigrant problem. They had all these people coming into the country that were messing up the standards, the things they valued in their society. They had all of these problems, and these Pharisees were powerless and out of control on all of those issues. But you know what they could control? A poor woman at the bottom of the totem pole who slept with the wrong guy. See, notice how they did exactly these things, right? They said, look at her, she's the problem. She's the one who's corrupting our society. We would never be sexually promiscuous. We wouldn't do these things. We're the righteous ones. And so now we need to punish her to restore order to our society, to get some illusion of control. See, that they're just doing the playbook. They're doing the very thing that human beings have always done in the midst of crisis. We've clamped down on others, controlled them for the sake of making ourselves feel better. And what's so important for us to understand this moment is if we look at it through authority, freedom, protection lenses, we're never going to get Jesus' actions. It's going to be so confusing because we're going to say, I just don't understand. It's nice to forgive people, but it doesn't make sense. It only makes sense when we recognize what they're doing because we know that we do it ourselves. I am very familiar with the Pharisees' tactics. I use them all the time. And when I understand that this is a story not about right and wrong, freedom and justice, freedom and protection, but this is a story about our sinful desire to force control in the face of uncertainty and crisis. Only then will I begin to understand why Jesus handled it the way that he did. See, notice what Jesus did. Jesus punctured all their illusions. He punctured them. But by making that simple statement, let the one who is without sin throw the first stone, he took away the narrative that they had been building around this moment. This narrative that she is the only sinner here, and so everything we do now is justified. He took that away. Not only that, he punctured their sanctimony. He exposed their image for what they were. And we know that he did that because the law of Moses does not actually say what they said it said. The law of Moses does not say if a woman is caught in adultery, she should be stoned to death. The law of Moses recognizes that adultery is a two-person job. And what it says is that if two people commit adultery, both of them, the man and the woman, should be stoned to death. There's a missing person in this moment. This person that I suspect was one of the Pharisees and religious leaders. This person who was getting off scot-free while they took out the punishment on someone with less power and influence. And Jesus punctured it. Punctured that self-righteous, hypocritical image that says we're the ones doing right, she's the one doing wrong. And by doing that, Jesus took away all moral authority that they had to inflict a controlling punishment on her. And the Pharisees and the religious leaders never forgave Jesus for doing it. In fact, they turned all of their desperate need for control onto him after this moment. They decided not to blame the woman anymore, but to blame Jesus for all of the disorder and the unrest that was going on in their world. They comforted themselves that they were the Pharisees and he was a dirty, seditious, second-rate rabbi. And then they put him to death, confident that by punishing him, they were now back comfortably in control of the situation. And by doing that, they accidentally fulfilled God's plan to set the whole world free from the control of sin and death. Because God had one more use for a scapegoat. See, when Jesus first hit the scene, John the Baptist, when he saw him, he said something really weird that people didn't really understand at the time. That he saw Jesus coming toward him and he said, "Look who it is, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin, not just of God's community of people under Aaron, who takes away the sin of the world." And sure enough, that's exactly what he did when the Pharisees put him to death on the cross, thinking that they were regaining their own control over the situation. They were instead fulfilling God's intentions from the beginning of time. Years later, when the writer of Hebrews would reflect on this is what he wrote. He said, when Christ came as high priest of the good things that are now already here, Jesus did not enter by means of the blood of goats or calves. He entered the most holy place once and for all by his own blood. And he thus obtained eternal redemption for you and for me. See, God gave that weird Old Testament law of these two goats and one of them being the scapegoat. He did it so that he could pave the way for us to understand one of the things Jesus would accomplish when he came to earth. That because Jesus willingly gave away and surrendered his own control of the situation, he could have handled it any way he wanted. He could have coerced the Pharisees. He could have punished them for their behaviors. He could have been the man in charge. And instead, Jesus submitted to the hurt, the injustice of the sinful people all around him, all the way up until the moment that they killed him. And because of Jesus' choice, because of his willingness to be a scapegoat once and for all, you and I now have actually been given by God himself a divine certainty in life. Not one that hinges on our own illusions of control, a certainty that comes because through the work of Jesus, you and I have been made right with God forever. And that because we now have an eternal reservation in heaven, we no longer have to fight for desperate control down here on earth. You see, the only certainty that's not an illusion is this, that Jesus paid it all. Jesus willingly chose to be our scapegoat. That God, in his goodness, gave us a healthy and a holy way to find certainty in the midst of uncertainty. And it's none of these illusions that we carve out. Dan Allender puts it this way. He says, our true certainty, our confidence comes from the goodness of God. That's what we really need, much more than we need a false sense of control, which is what we settle for. And instead, he says that we will trust in the goodness of God only to the degree that we have a history of brokenness and surrender. The only way for us to have true certainty in life, the only way for us to innately understand the goodness of God that gives us confidence is by embracing brokenness and surrender. See, I believe Christians, we get authority all wrong when we try to use our power to coerce others in a desperate grasp for a false sense of control. I get deeply concerned when Christians talk about their freedoms in the temporal kingdom, because if we truly knew the spiritual freedom that we have in Christ, we wouldn't have to fight for it so much. I've learned that it's a sign in myself that the more I'm fighting for my freedom and my protection, it's because I am resisting the brokenness and the surrender that God is inviting me to, the brokenness and surrender that would truly give me eternal freedom. I get concerned when Christians talk about their protections, because I have learned over and over again that in our protectionist fears, we will, just like the Pharisees, resort to scapegoating and blame of others. And we will clamp down in controlling coercive behaviors and laws and expectations that will only hurt others around us. I've learned that peace only comes from God when we finally admit that we cannot control our uncertain world or any of the people around us. Peace only comes when we face the painful truth that we cannot truly make anything happen. I cannot make this church thrive and grow. I cannot make my children follow in my footsteps of faith. I can't force intimate joy with my wife. I can hardly even control myself most days. And I've learned that you and I, we will never have confidence in the goodness of God until that moment finally comes when we've fallen on our face in the mud, when we've been made a fool and experienced public humiliation. And then, when we're bleeding and choking in the dust, waiting to be stoned by the other people around us for our failures, only then will we allow ourselves to take the hand of Jesus, who pulls you up, and he tells you that he does not condemn you for your mistakes. He doesn't even blame you for your futile attempts to control your own uncertainty. And in brokenness, you get to surrender to God's story, whatever he may be writing through you and around you. You get to surrender yourself. You get to surrender control of others and turn it all over to the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And what I promise is that once you do that, there is nobody on earth who can control you ever again. Because there is nothing they can take from you once Jesus has given it to you. And there is nothing anyone can give you that Jesus hasn't already offered you freely in love. And so with respect to Ben Franklin, I believe that the true tension for the Christian is not between our freedom and our protection. It is between our control and our surrender. And when we choose control, we only ever make ourselves and others miserable. But when we choose surrender, Jesus Christ gives us freedom and joy and protection in this life and in the next. Amen. I told you that I was grateful to preach this topic today, and it's because this topic finally helped me understand something about my friend Chris. It only clicked for me this week that Chris Toomey was the least controlling person I have ever met. I worked with him for 7 years, and in 7 years, I never saw him blame someone. I never saw him prop himself up or defend his image at the sake of somebody else. I never saw him try to coercively control another person's behaviors, even as he was entrusted with leadership of this congregation. And I think I finally know that it was his willingness to surrender all of that to Jesus that is why he made such a joyful impact on me and everyone who knew him. You see, Chris lived by a mantra from Jim Elliot. We shared it on Friday. Jim Elliot was a missionary, and he wrote that he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And what I believe is true is that Chris surrendered all of his illusions of control and protection and certainty, and he gained from Jesus Christ himself a life of passion and freedom that could not be taken away, not even by death itself. And so I pray that this reflection this morning, that Chris's example, that you have someone in your life that has willingly relinquished control to you, that has surrendered all of their protectionistic tendencies, that you see in the life of Jesus himself, the life that some of Jesus's followers live out so beautifully, that we are given freedom, we are given protection, but it comes from a completely unexpected source. It comes from a God who surrendered everything to love us, and it comes when we surrender everything right back to our God. Amen. I'd like to close out today by singing a song of surrender, a song where we freely, knowingly, confidently submit to our Father the one who gave us the scapegoat of Jesus Christ, the one who took all of our blame on his shoulders so that he could give us something better in exchange. Would you please stand with me now and let's sing our final song today.
Thank you so much for joining us and being a part of our online Pathfinder community. For more information, or if you're new here, please visit our website, pathfinderstl.org, where you can also find access to our podcasts, which will give you more content and help you lead you on your spiritual journey. Please feel free to like, comment, and share this video with whoever you think this could apply to, and have a blessed week.